Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L and welcome to, a video on the rising of the shield hero. This is an episode changes or episode differences type video. We're going to be covering some changes that occurred between the novel and the anime for for episode 14 and 15 of the Shield Hero anime. I'm going to point out to you changes that I think are the most interesting for these two episodes. Now I will let you know in advance, I feel is a pretty big narrative change when it comes to Raphtalia throughout these two episodes, such that the Raphtalia in the novel ends up giving a very different impression than Raphtalia in the anime, and the way that the anime treats Raphtalia opens up a bigger discussion about, well, why are they changing Raphtalia in these small ways? And that could be the topic of its own analysis video, which I might do depending on time. So look forward to that. It's going to be towards the end of the video. So let's just get right into it. Let's start with episode 14. Here are some differences that were occurring. The first change is more or less something that just was omitted from the anime. It's not that big, but if you love anime powers, then this one is for you. This is Raphtalia and her spidey-sense. As it turns out, Raphtalia reveals that she has a weird sense for when something is strange. In her words, she says, "Sometimes I feel like something strange is going on, but I wouldn't be able to tell unless I was really close." When you read this, it really does sound like it's some kind of secret sense. Like if there's someone following her, it seems that she has some idea of how to track them. Now this makes sense because Raphtalia's element is shadow, and that largely revolves around illusions and concealment. Next up, we have a small world building change. That is Demi-humans running away from Naofumi. So Naofumi, as he was trying to go towards the town that had some Demi-humans, the one that was in the territory that Melty pointed out, they were experiencing something where Demi-humans were running away from him. Initially, Naofumi thought, well, are they going to inform on him? But they met quite a few Demi-humans. In fact, 10 times it happened where the Demi-humans ran away from Naofumi without reporting him. Raphtalia later found out that the Demi-humans were ordered to not speak directly to Naofumi. The exact reasoning being that the Shield Hero had told them not to speak with the Shield Hero, Naofumi effectively. So this was really interesting. This just informs you a little bit more about the machinations of the country, and it was just interesting to see like how Naofumi found out about this little bit of a conspiracy occurring. Like, who told the Demi-humans is the big question that popped up there, although like the quickest conclusion you can jump to is that that was just false information or propaganda promoted by the kingdom. Next change, Naofumi had actually met Glasses Bro earlier, and in the novel, Naofumi calls him the nice guy. This is what the Glasses Bro had to say about that situation. "You once sold me an item for which I am very grateful. The materials are quite simple, so you see pieces like it everywhere, but your design hero makes it much more valuable to me. It costs 5 times more than similar items, but I feel like it was worth it." So that just told you that Naofumi had been in the area before. He had actually done business in the area. He had thought that the nice guy might have been someone that Melty knew. He was already considering it in the novel. Another big thing to pull out there is that Melty also found out how Naofumi kind of gouged the guy for a lot of money. That led to a funny little exchange between the two. Another small change is that Naofumi and Melty had more conflict. The reason that this change is important is because it reminds you of how much hate Naofumi still has for her sister and father. Specifically, it shows you how much that hate is still clouding his judgment, and it was specifically happening somewhere before Naofumi went to sleep in Glasses Bro's house. The gist of the conversation was that Melty was telling Naofumi that he should get to sleep, and Naofumi was complaining that he's had his stuff stolen while he slept and that people will betray him, so he's not really into that. And then Melty was like, "Well, why don't you trust me? Why can't you trust me?" And then Naofumi's like, "Well, because of your father and your sister." So that was the bit of a conflict that occurred between them. Like, this is still unfolding, that there is still some animosity between the two parties. It is important to keep that in mind. A nice little extra detail, because I don't have anywhere else to throw it in there. Melty also revealed something about her mother during this little conversation. Specifically that her mother, before she left the kingdom, she had taken paintings and statues of her father and sister and burnt them whenever they behaved the way that they currently were behaving. So that just informed you, this has been a long time problem that the queen has had. Another bonus change, the scene where Naofumi was having his little doubts about the food in the anime, that's actually expanded. In the novel, it was just a very quick mention that Naofumi had a meal and that it seemed safe enough. The interaction with Naofumi and Glasses Bro showing him that it's not poison, that's totally anime original. It really just helped flesh out that particular scene. Okay, now we're moving into the portion of Naofumi breaking into the compound. So one big thing that occurred here was that Raphtalia was actually casting a lot of magic. In the anime, you had just Philo jumping in through the mountains and just going straight to the main place. In the novel, Raphtalia had actually been casting tactical spells to darken surroundings so that they could make their way jumping from roof to roof without anyone noticing. This was important just to let you know that Raphtalia has a lot of magic that she can cast, and she's using it pretty often to help the group. Another detail that came up during this portion was another kind of world building detail. The town was sketchy, and this is what we had being told to us. I think it is because at nighttime these nobles do things that they can't tell others about. Even if they heard that you were approaching, I doubt that they'd be able to respond very quickly. So this was something that Raphtalia said in response to why there weren't as many guards as Naofumi was expecting. She then continued to say that the nobility here don't want the guards to keep too close of a watch. The general implication was that this whole town was guilty of whatever Idol was doing. Like, all the nobles here were doing the same things, like the same unsavory practices. It's going on everywhere, and it's just deviancy in general. So that was a pretty interesting detail that you wouldn't have found out in the anime. The next thing that popped up was also that these people were employing monsters as guard dogs. Naofumi called them oversized guard dogs. They were called Guardia, and they were black creatures with fangs like wolves. So if you imagine that dog that Raphtalia and Naofumi first fought against in the mines and just removed one head, it really sounds like it kind of matches that general description. And now we are approaching the part of the episode where the fights were taking place. And this is where a lot of the narrative changes. And it's going to be interesting to talk about this later. So first we're going to start off with the noble's whip. That whip he was using actually has a lot more going into it. As Idol said, this whip has been absorbing the blood of demi-humans for years. I doubt that even the shield hero can stand up to it. To which Naofumi observed, is it a cursed object? And then he continued to just go through his thought process, thinking that it seemed like a kind of weapon that could curse you if it connected. And sure enough, Idol had later hit one of the guards that was in the room accidentally, and the armor had been described as warping dramatically before the man threw up blood and collapsed on the floor. So yeah, it had enormous attack power. It should have been avoided. It was definitely cursed. At one point, Naofumi grabbed the whip. It made it feel like his hand was burning. So at that point, Naofumi confirmed it was definitely cursed, and it was something that they had to use holy water to get rid of later. Now, the interesting change here is because this adds more battle power to Idol himself, and it also changes things when you consider that Raphtalia was getting hit by that whip in the anime. In the anime, the whip isn't cursed, which leads into like the next big change. Specifically, the noble was actually a challenge for Raphtalia. It was so much of a challenge that Raphtalia needed Melty and Philo to coordinate magic against him. Naofumi also theorized that this noble had gone through the rank up ceremony that was denied to him and his group. Heck, Naofumi even thought that this man was capable of fighting in the waves himself. When you consider that Melty told you that this man had fought alongside her father in the war, it told you that this guy knew a lot about battling, and that didn't really come out in the anime. The fight that occurred in the novel also had Raphtalia doing more, between throwing her magic sword right at the guy like a javelin to nullify his magic, and then burying her physical sword into his shoulder. But the big question is, why did the fight change so much from this dynamic interplay between all the forces that we had going on? Well, it may be because in the novel, the moral conflict that Raphtalia has, it didn't really occur. In the anime episode, Raphtalia was shown being more lenient, but in the novel, this pause never really happened. That pause where she goes in and tells the guy that she doesn't want to stoop to his level, that never happens. In fact, the fight went straight through, with Raphtalia calling out Idol for treating demi-human children and women terribly, and for using war as a justification for treating those two parties terribly. And then she proceeds to tell him that she'll never forgive him and that she was going to kill him, and then she pushes him towards the window. That's a pretty big change from the anime. Heck, even Naofumi's dialogue here was not in the novel. In fact, Naofumi's actual thoughts about this whole situation was that if Raphtalia wanted revenge, he wanted to help her, and even if it wasn't right, even if it wasn't the ethical thing to do, he wanted to stand on Raphtalia's side. That's a big difference from the Naofumi who was comforting Raphtalia in the anime. So the big thing to keep in mind here was that Raphtalia did not pause at all when it came to offing Idol. She buried swords in him, she was okay with everything she was doing to him, she gave enough reason to be justified with what she was doing, and it's very interesting that the anime changed that. Now, a small change before we continue into like other big changes. No one had actually said that Idol was dead. Naofumi just assumed that he was dead in the novel. So that's also pretty interesting as to why Idol comes up later in episode 15 when someone actively said he was dead. No, like it was a bad assumption on Naofumi's part. Okay, and now for this little bit, we're going to move into the flashbacks real quick. So a big thing to keep in mind is that the flashback material is actually from Volume 1, and the rest of this material is from Volume 4. The flashback came from an extra story that was revealed in Volume 1. And there's like a few changes, but like largely it's consistent. The biggest change is just like in the novel, the first thing that Raphtalia does is pray in front of Rifana's skeleton. Now, if you watch the anime, you might be a little bit confused about that because Raphtalia didn't know that her friend had passed. But that wasn't the case originally. In fact, in the novel's timeline, Rifana died in front of Raphtalia, and Raphtalia was punished for her death, and then Raphtalia was made to look at her friend's corpse. Well, made to look might be a strong word. Like, Raphtalia just was shocked and just looked at her friend's corpse dangling as she was being whipped. So you can already hear why the anime wouldn't want to show that and why they most likely changed it to something a little bit more easy to deal with. And now we're moving into the final really big change. And I want to preface this by saying, like, I don't know if the content that occurs here occurs later in the story of Shield Hero, but for the one-to-one comparison, this doesn't occur. In the anime, Raphtalia has a pretty big breakdown in front of her friend when she questions what she was doing. That breakdown in the cell, it didn't happen in the novel. Which is interesting because if you saw my impression video for that Shield Hero episode, you might recall that I point out some things about Raphtalia's behavior, specifically that the breakdown she had seemed like a repeat of a previous conclusion or resolution she came to back when they first fought off the second wave. Novel Raphtalia doesn't have that breakdown, and overall she seems way more confident and like way more of an established character. So it's very interesting that the anime went so far to make Raphtalia so vulnerable when the character herself wasn't that vulnerable. When I look at it, the impression that I get from novel Raphtalia is that novel Raphtalia is more fleshed out and more resolute in who she is than anime Raphtalia. And now with this, I just feel like anime Raphtalia legitimately did regress a little bit in her characterization by returning to a problem that she had already fixed in her head. So very interesting. I do want to talk more about these big changes that occurred with Raphtalia's character, but this video is already very long. I'm gonna call it there. Keep an eye out. I might make that analysis video within a week. So if you're interested in that, you can come back to the channel and check it out. But for now, those are the big changes that I spotted in episode 14 and 15. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.